Welcome to CEO Money. I'm Michael Yorba. Thanks for joining us. I have Rebecca Walser. She is Walser Wealth Management, in charge of that, and owner. And welcome to the show, Rebecca.
Thank you for having me. So great to be here.
All right. You are a top 100 US advisor, a tax attorney, wealth strategist, and a certified financial planner. And you have a #1 best-selling book, Wealth Unbroken, and Growing Wealth Uninterrupted by Market Crashes, Taxes, and Even Death. I want to hear more about this.
Yes, I absolutely have a really unique background. I basically started out with an undergrad in finance, and I was 21 years old, and I was working for the global managing partner of financial services based in London for PricewaterhouseCoopers. And so I knew from a very young age, wow, this is my passion. And I did corporate finance and commercial finance for almost a little over a decade before I went to become a lawyer, because I kept bumping up against tax. And I always knew I really underlined wanting to be a lawyer. But I wasn't exactly sure what area, because financial, obviously, there's a couple different ways to go. And so I went to Florida, University of Florida, for my law degree. And then I went to NYU in New York City for my advanced law degree in taxation, which is, the best program we have in the country. And so I really was practicing tax law. I loved doing it, but knew I had this experience where I was in a boardroom with a client. The client was at the end of the board, at the head of the table. I was on one side, and his financial advisor was on the other side. And the advisor proceeded to start to talk first about some recommendations. And I literally could feel my ears like turning red, because both the client and the advisor had no idea that my whole background was in finance before I became a tax attorney. And I had on heels. I'm digging my heels into the carpet just so I can keep telling myself I'm a tax attorney. I'm just a tax attorney. I'm just a tax attorney. And I knew in that own instant that there was no way I could just be a tax attorney the rest of my life. And so I pretty much opened my own practice 4 years ago, and doing quite well.
Now, you're a disruptor in your industry sector. Give us the basis of that. How are you different from other advisors or CPAs?
Well, it's really difficult because I am so anti-qualified pre-tax wealth building, and that is the conventional mainstream wisdom. I mean, I cannot believe that nobody has called this malpractice, that in 2008 we're still telling Americans to build their wealth in pre-tax accounts when we have some of the lowest taxes that we've had really since FDR in the 30s. In this new tax code that we have under President Trump. And so you're going to defer paying the tax at this low rate so that you can pay it at some future rate, which we don't know what the future rate is, but we can read the tea leaves. And the tea leaves of American financial system is not good. If we could have planned a worse fiscal position, we would not have been able to do a better job than what we have, which is basically literally $22 trillion of debt bumping up and colliding with the mass demographic shift of the retirement of the baby boomers. And when the baby boomers retire, what we just have to understand at a very high level, it's a double negative. Every single one of them is a double negative, because right now they're paying into the system that is a pay-as-you-go program. And so just simply retiring means that's a negative, first negative, you take out the payment, and then they go on to the recipient side, which is taking from the system. It's a double negative. And what we have is the largest demographic shift really in the history of the world, from worker to recipient. And FDR, when he signed Social Security into law in 1935, the first boomer wasn't born until 11 years later in 1946. The system was not written for the boomers. It wasn't even written for people to live till their 80s. It was expecting people to die at 65 at the latest. So we've got all of these people getting it for 20 years. And the government has been telling us for at least 15 years that we would not get to a 2-to-1 payment, payer and to recipient until 2030. 2030 is a key year because that's the year the last boomer retires. So the government has told us for 15 years that we would not be at a 2-to-1 ratio until the last boomer retires in 2030. We hit 2-to-1 in December of 2017. We had 61 million plus Americans record Social Security recipients for the first time, and 126 million FTEs, full-time equivalents. That is roughly 2-to-1, and that is before 70% of our boomers have even begun to retire. This is a nightmare. Future tax rates will be a nightmare, and paying and building wealth in a pre-tax account is one of the dumbest things you can do in 2018.
I'm glad you brought that to the table. I'm going to change gears for just a second, then I want to get into the 401k mistakes. But first, how do you bring new clients on?
So basically, through the book, obviously the book came out in January. It's been a really key. We've did an entire book tour in the entire country. We've gone around and met all kinds of people that have said, something just doesn't resonate with me with what I'm hearing from conventional, wisdom, financial commercials, financial shows, financial advisors. They're not talking about the taxes. They're just talking about growing my money. They're not talking to me about the tax implications of what the future looks like. And so anybody that's sort of, looking for something different and says, this just doesn't seem like it makes sense with $22 trillion federal debt here, they just reach out, they search us, and we publicize everything which way to Sunday. Hey, conventional wisdom is getting this wrong. In fact, I don't believe in pre-tax money at all unless you're getting a match. If you're getting a match, then I say make the contribution. But if you're not getting a match at all or beyond the match, I wouldn't put one penny in. So we just have a lot of materials out there to let people know that there is a reckoning that's coming, and we don't want it to happen with their money.
Got it. All right, let's talk about the mistake, the 401k mistake.
The 401k mistake is really taking advice that really did make sense when it came about in 1981. The 401k was a tax dodge for corporate executives that was written into the Revenue Act of 1978. It wasn't until 1981 when not even an accountant, but just a benefits advisor who put together a benefits plan was looking through the code and came across the 401k and said, hey, I really think that we could use this to sort of, offer a bonus plan that wouldn't have current taxation. And he presented it to a client. They rejected it, but then he took it to his own company, the Johnson Companies, not Johnson & Johnson, and they implemented it. So they implemented it in 1981, and at that implementation, it really spread like wildfire. And of course it would. If you think about it from a CFO perspective, if you have a pension, a defined benefit plan that you have to put billions of dollars away and manage the risk of that money on an ongoing basis because all of the burden is on you to provide these pension plans for your employees. If you can go from that to just a measly pawsly match and the actual responsibilities on the employee to manage this money, you're saving millions upon millions of dollars a year. So it was very quickly that CFOs went into their CEOs and said, oh my gosh, we can save millions of dollars. And that's exactly what they did. And they did it so much that they started rating their own pension plans. And then we had all that problem that happened. They changed the laws on now you have to have a certain amount built up in the pension plan. But the bottom line is, if you go back in time, like almost back to the future, you have to go back to 1981 to understand where this advice came from around the 401k. That was now universally available for the most part to people instead of a pension plan that said, hey, don't pay the tax on this money right now. You're in your peak earning years. We've got high taxes. You're in peak earning years. Put this money aside, and when you retire, because you'll be making less, you'll be paying less in taxes. And that made sense to people. It resonated with people. Yeah, I'm at the top of my game here, or I've got kids to pay for, a mortgage to pay for, college to pay for somebody. I have too much going out, and I don't want to pay all this tax right now. Let me not pay the tax, put this money aside, and then I'll pay it when I retire, and I make less, I'll pay less. But what underlies that logic is that the tax rates have to stay the same. Because if tax rates go up at all, you could make less and pay more in tax. It's just that simple. So when you look back into 1981, you realize that on the day President Ronald Reagan was inaugurated, January of 1981, we didn't have a debt problem. We had $980 billion of debt the day he was inaugurated. And it took us all the way till October of that year to get to $1 trillion. So 980 took us 10 months to add $20 billion to the deficit. So that's how slow we didn't have a debt problem. And if you look at the boomers at that time, they were only 16 years old to 34 years old. So nobody's thinking about this teenager to young 30s going to retire en masse in 30 years and what kind of terrible implications that's going to be for our system. So when you look at what the logic was that made it make sense to defer tax till later and to build this wealth pre-tax, it completely made sense. But now what you have is you have Reagan's tax cut that went into effect in 87, and it really set the tone for the next 30 years of tax policy. We've had the lowest tax policy in the last 3 decades since the 30s. You have to go back to the 1930s to find lower taxation in American history. So The last 30 years, the last 3 decades, we've had the lowest tax policies, and yet we've continued our spending. And so we've been spending via deficits, and we've been funding our actual spending via deficits. Half of our money that we spend a year is funded by deficit spending, money that we're not collecting. And 30 years of this later, and we have the results. We have $22 trillion at the edge of total federal debt. That's reported and published. And now we have the looming retirement of the baby boomers. So we are having them retire onto a system that a pay-as-you-go system cannot afford to pay all the benefits out. And we have this federal debt that $550 billion of what we spend every year is going right now to service our debt at $21 trillion, $22 trillion. That's half of our federal budget going to debt service at this point. It's only going to get worse as we go closer to 30 trillion. So this is the problem with having your money in pre-tax accounts, because when the chickens come home to roost, when we go to pay the piper, your account, your pre-tax, you're looking at that saying, I've got $1 million in my 401k. The government is looking at it and saying, we have $1 million that we can still tax here. And that's the problem.
Before we get into the non-negotiable number in retirement, do you have a solution for that problem?
Absolutely. There really are 2 tax-free asset classes, and there's only 2. And the first one is an extraction of the second one that's been in our code since 1912. So cash value life insurance, since the very beginning of our code, has always been the most tax-favored asset class in the code. Senator Roth basically said, we need an investment product that emulates cash value life insurance. And so they extracted the cash value life insurance tax code, and they basically emulated it with the Roth. The Roth is the equivalent of what we have with life insurance, with the exception that they add a lot of conditions. You can't access it before 59 and a half without a tax penalty. You can't take a distribution before 59 and a half without a tax penalty. You have to let it season for all these things they added to it. But yeah, so you have the unbelievable opportunity right now, the calm before the storm, where we have the lowest taxes really since FDR, that you can still convert this money from pre-tax IRA 401k traditional to a Roth IRA 401k traditional. And you know what? The government is in on this secret. They know that it is so good that Senator Orrin Hatch, a Republican, under the last, tax discussion of the tax code in December, basically proposed the Hatch Amendment, which proposed the elimination of the traditional to Roth conversion. So the government knows this is too good for American people, and they're going to try to get rid of it. It didn't get passed this last time, but that is coming. So our window of opportunity to move this money from taxed forever to tax never again inside of a Roth is slowly closing. And we're going to be out of the opportunity to do so soon anyways, because even if you could convert to a Roth, at the point that the tax rates are 40, 50, 60%, who cares? You're going to be paying 40, 50, and 60%. And at that point, the only thing you're trying to get away from is the 70, 80, and 90% potential that could possibly come even later.
Oh, amazing. All right, talk to me about the non-negotiable number in retirement. I want to know what this is.
The non-negotiable number in retirement is not a tax number. It has to do with volatility risk. So what we really like to do is give people the example of Mount Everest. And really climbing Mount Everest is a great example of our financial life cycle as a human being. Basically, the climb, the accumulation phase of life is us climbing the mountain. That is what most financial advisors focus on. What is my rate of return? What is my return on investments? What's my ROI? When am I going to get out? What's going to happen? Where's my money going? They really focus on accumulating and building wealth. And then something happens, though, as Americans and as people that get to a certain point of our life. When we retire, we now substitute the capital that we've spent all of our accumulation years building into work for our place. We basically step out of the working role and we put our capital to work for us for the rest of our life. Most advisors sort of say, okay, well, I've built you up, and you go to them and you say, what's my distribution strategy? What's my exit strategy? And they say, well, you'll be fine. Just 4% a year, 3%, 3.5%, 4%, 5%, 6%, some say 8% a year, which is absolutely ridiculous. 8% a year, 4% a year, you'll be able to just live off of your cash flow the rest of your life off your portfolio. And that's the extent of the advice. And that's terrible. And that's completely unacceptable, because just like Mount Everest, 90% of failures, 80% of the deaths that occur on climbing Mount Everest occur on the descent. And this is the same thing in financial life cycle. If you do not have an exit strategy, if you do not have a distribution plan, and you're just going to go with the whim of the market and think that you can just take 3%, you're going to be fine. It's not fine, because all we have to do is go back and look at the dot-com bust of the 2000s and the Great Recession of 2008 and see that even though people stayed in and got their money back, they were really trapped. And they really couldn't access those funds. If you look at the Great Recession, it was 4.5 years. You had to keep your money in the market, and you couldn't access it for 4.5 years. This is not the plan that a retiree can live with the rest of their life in retirement.
Got it. And you'll be able to straighten those out when you have a chance to talk to people individually, because I'm sure not all plans fit every person. You have to. Oh,
of course not. Of course not. I'm just talking about a pure stock portfolio, your 60-40, plain vanilla 60-40 stock bond portfolio that most advisors are saying, hey, stick with this and take 4% a year and you'll be fine. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, no, I'm not good with cookie cutters myself. All right, the perfect storm brewing in America, 2018, 2 largest threats.
2018 perfect storm is really what we sort of already have just covered. It's the fact that we are really at 4 years left of really good really strong stability before the calm is interrupted with everything hitting the fan. And what I mean by that is, when I mentioned before, we're already at 2-to-1. We hit 2-to-1 retirees, 2-to-1 payees for every one retiree on Social Security distribution right now. But that's not really the problem. The real problem is what's going to happen beginning in 2022. Beginning in 4 short years in 2022, almost 3 short years from now, we are literally going to have 70% of the entire baby boomer population retire in a 5 to 6 year succession, 1 year after the other year after the other year. So we now are we are on borrowed time now. We have a time clock now on how great tax policy could possibly be and how fast it's going to run out. This is the time to look at your wealth building, what you've done, where it's sitting, look at it from a tax perspective and say, geez, is it the time for me to utilize these low rates that we got past December of last year and really move this money from pre-tax, tax forever to tax never again, whether it's the Roth, life insurance, or some other strategy. And that's really what we have to be looking at in 2018. We can't lose even 1 year of opportunity to move this money because, yeah, it's true. Right now we can convert all the money in 1 year, but that would be horrifically painful. And as a tax lawyer, we always want to control the tax burn. So we want to come up with a strategy that allows us to do it over a period of years and slowly.
Give me one takeaway from your top-selling book, Unbroken, or Wealth Unbroken, that stood out to your readers.
I'd have to say that it's probably because I'm so blatantly calling, conventional wisdom a farce, but I think people don't understand the history of where our pre-tax wealth came from. They don't understand how it was a tax dodge, and it was never intended. This is the most insulting thing. One of the richest countries on the face of the earth in the history of time, the United States of America, and our main conventional retirement vehicle happened by accident. It was never designed to be utilized for the retirement of the United States of America. It was designed to be a tax dodge for highly compensated executives on top of their pension. And here we are, 30 years later. I went back when I wrote the book and did the research, and I said, did anybody do any research, a white paper, statistics? Did we go to the London School of Economics? Did we go to MIT? Did we do any kind of statistical modeling, mathematical modeling, regression analysis, anything to see if this plan would work? And you know what? Nothing. Goose egg, because it happened by accident. This is what happens when you roll out plans by accident. You have the law of unintended consequences, and that's what we're about to experience in these next 10, 15 years.
Rebecca, thanks for being a guest on the show. I hope to have more conversations with you. It was tremendously enlightening, and I really love your enthusiasm and your passion for what you do.
Thank you so much. It was so great to be with you.
You've been watching CEO Money with Michael Yorba. Thanks for joining with us. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.